Good morning. Welcome to this special edition of KTN Morning Prime. My name is Peter Wakaba. Well, on this budget day, the year 2024, we are here, of course, to bring you the latest on what exactly is transpiring right across the country here in Nairobi ahead of the budget, reading in Parliament later today. Of course, to remind everybody that the budgeting process after the 2010 Constitution was promulgated, changed, and most people are used to the budget being an event. Of course, this time round, it is a process. We want to give you insights into that process, the different aspects, of course, from the budget policy statement to the release of the various documents, the various stages, and of course, bringing us to today, when the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury, Njuguna Ndung'u, is expected to make a walk to Parliament, and after his reading about 3 weeks to a month of the Committee of the Whole House then examining the Finance Bill before that becomes the Finance Act, if it is changed. Of course, insights into that process. Will they change it will they pass it without any changes, as has been directed from some quarters? Of course, the allegations being that the MPs have been asked to pass it without any changes in order to enable the government achieve its set objectives, set targets. Well, we are set to get into all that. Of course, to remind you also that we will be coming at you live from various different parts of the country to bring you public sentiment. What exactly the people at the grassroots in various parts of the country have to say about the process today. Of course, also knowing that this has been a process that started at the grassroots and then, of course, got into the various stages of government and is now today in Parliament at the national level. I want to start off by introducing my panel here. Of course, some of them were here for the show before. Other new ones have joined in. To my right, Bill Okero, investor, businessman, economic analyst, a man with lots and lots of experience in governance and politics, as well in this budget conversation. Karibu sana. And of course, Professor Gituro Wainaina, lots of experience in the economic space, long-term experience in planning, of course, giving us insights into how long-term plans are then trickling down into this budget-making process. And then on my left, Dominic Mwenja, CBK Pension Fund Chair, a man who, of course, will speak into the money conversation. One of the things that many people do not know is that aspects of the budget, like infrastructure and that sort of thing, should be financed from long-term funds. And this has, of course, to do with everything from pensions to money supply. And of course, then asking, do Kenyans really have the savings that are required to run this infrastructure project? Why are we borrowing to do it? That sort of conversation. And we have the gentleman to speak into that, of course, in very broad terms. And then last but not least, Solomon Kihanga, Senior Manager, Tax and Regulatory Services, KPMG Kenya. Thank you for making the time to talk to us. Well, let's get into it then. We want, of course, to start off by setting the stage. And we'll start off with a story that looks at what part of that process has been. And that's to say that the government has reduced this financial year's overall budget by some 132.46 billion shillings from the 3.981 trillion shillings to about 3.84 billion shillings. Now, that figure was what was given last week. It has since changed and is now at some 1 trillion shillings rather. And this is a reduction of about 3.3%. And that came about when President Ruto signed into law the 2024 Supplementary Appropriations Bill and the 2024 Division of Revenue Bill at State House, Nairobi on Monday. Now, KTN's Innocent Ogaro has those details.
The new laws unlock the resources that will catalyze economic performance and enhance service delivery. The Supplementary Appropriation Act 2024 now reduces 32.6 billion shillings from various budget allocations. With the rationalization of expenditures, the law authorizes the spending of 102 billion shillings from the Consolidated Fund for the year ending June 30th, 2024. The education budget has been enhanced, with the university education receiving 4.4 billion shillings and secondary education 1.1 billion shillings. Development spending has been redirected to priority areas and reduced by 75.2 billion shillings, while 51.1 billion shillings has been allocated for emerging pressing needs. The law also regularizes 23.6 billion shillings expenditure under Article 223 of the Constitution that allows financing of emergencies and later approval by Parliament. These expenditures include emergency interventions such as 4.3 billion shillings to the State Department for Arid and Semi-Arid Areas and regional development for humanitarian support to those who were affected by floods.
The bill advances the administration's fiscal consolidation plan through expenditure rationalization. In that endeavor, the bill reduces the overall budget for financial year 2023-2024 by Kenya shillings 132.46 billion from Kenya shillings 3,981.53 billion to Kenya shillings 3,848.07 billion.
Additionally, 3 billion shillings has been allocated to the Department of Internal Security for El Nino disaster management and another 3 billion for the fertilizer subsidy program. 1 billion has been allocated for emergency rehabilitation of roads. Additionally, 11.4 billion shillings has been set aside for the Kenya Revenue Authority to enhance revenue collection efforts. In addition, 2 billion has been allocated to the medical insurance for the National Police Service. The approved additional expenditures are set to address emergency interventions, over destruction caused by the El Nino rains, and other critical needs. These include 5.3 billion shillings for emergency relief assistance, 3.3 billion shillings for security operations, and 1.1 billion for mopping up excess milk by the new KCC. This increase is expected to elevate provision of services by ensuring that county governments are adequately funded to perform their functions outlined in the 4th schedule of the Constitution. Innocent Ogaro, KTN News, Nairobi.
Well, that then sort of sets the stage, and we want to start off this discussion with a look at the process itself. And I think the question I want to ask, Prof, is
yes.
Vision 2030, beautiful document, setting out lots of beautiful things that Kenyans want to achieve and how to then go about that with priorities and pillars and that kind of thing. And then from that, the conversation being that we are supposed to have 5-year plans that then break this down into achievable chunks that give us policy direction on what we want to set out in the medium term. And then, of course, the strategy that is supposed to give us a sort of smaller but achievable policy direction in terms of this, and then the annual budgets.
Right.
There seems to be a terrible disconnect between Kenyans' aspirations and the budgeting process. It's like the people who have done this have not had any conversations with the planners.
I think there's something else perhaps you need to bring into the mix, the CIDPs.
Yes.
The County Integrated Development Plans. Because it's tied up to the MTPs, medium-term plans.
Yes.
I probably can explain in a very short term that every country must see down the road where they're headed, and even as individuals. And probably give my personal journey. When I was listening to a lady this morning, and when she was 10 years or 15, she said she wanted to work with the UN. And she did actually meet Onan.
Yes.
And she worked for the UN. When I was Form 2, I actually said I want to be a professor.
Wow.
And I remember writing in the 2 Fs.
Yes.
So even you go to the country,
Yes.
where do you want to be? And that's what the president said. Then we must have a vision. Very clear and very clear what we want, high quality life for all Kenyans.
Yes.
It doesn't matter whether you come from Kuria, come Tana River or Bomet or whatever. So that was very clear. But perhaps 2 things which come into that. You must have a champion.
Yes.
You must have somebody who is dedicated to it.
Who owns the vision?
Who owns a vision.
Yes.
And somebody who provides that leadership. And very well structured. We have the vision, then we have our, used to call it development plans,
Yes.
but now medium-term plans. Then from there, you get the 3 years strategy, say the MTEF,
Yes.
that's a expenditure framework. Then you have the annual, which was with performance contracts.
Yes.
So would know, as Drakra said, what is not measured is not done. So it actually connect what you are going to do with the year. And I remember a retreat in Mount Kenya where Kibaki said, no, I don't want to be told it in the budget. I want, if I go to the central bank,
Yes.
is there money really needed to support it? And I think that's the thing we miss today. We have a budget, but you cannot literally say, these are the resources backing it.
Yes.
And that's the disconnect which is there. So then that annual, and he said, no, I want to see what you have there. I want to see the annual work plans. I want to see other good stuff. So that leadership with Francis Muthaura and a gentleman per se collapsed
Yes.
when he left. And Vision 2030 is not a party vision.
Yes.
It was a government. And we need to distinguish between a party and a government.
Yes.
Parties can be for 5 years or for 10 years. Unfortunately, one thing we never did is to ring-fence the Vision 2030 in law.
Yes.
So that doesn't matter whether it's Prof who comes in or Solomon who comes in and for the whole thing. But if you look at the document, it was great.
Yes.
At the bottom line, the leadership collapsed after 2013.
Why do you think it is the case that then every succeeding leader seems to go off in a different direction? Then, of course, creating the chaos that we have now, because you have the focus being infrastructure to provide broad-based growth then. But then you next have leadership that decides we are going to focus on these specific areas and sort of abandon the others. Then later on, you're now seeing a totally different direction. It creates chaos for...
I think it was, when you even go to the Jubilee,
Yes.
and they had the big four.
Yes.
You know, if you look at the housing, it was in the social pillar. If you look at manufacturing,
Yes.
it was the economic pillar. Agriculture was there. And then there's the other one, affordable housing and healthcare.
Yes.
So what the Jubilee government was, we have these 5 years, and the medium term gives programs, projects across government.
Yes.
But say we can run with these 4. Why? They have a higher impact in the economy.
Yes.
The Kwanzaa government comes in and say we can run with these 5,
Yes.
the 5 pillars, ICT, medium term, medium and small enterprises,
Yes.
and all that, 5 of them, agriculture and all that.
Yes.
I think we can fast track this. And my understanding is not that they deviated from the vision, because those are still within the vision.
Yes.
What we find is that cold feet or pouring cold water on the Vision 2030 by the Jubilee regime.
Yes.
And the whole thing now, you have people perhaps who don't believe in the vision. And I think it's important to, if you look at the leadership within the National Economic
Social
Council,
yes.
as we talk, they were the one who put holes in
Yes.
terms of the vision. And we do know why that happened. And good work in the Constitution,
Yes.
expectations, but they never happened.
Yes.
So what do? I
Poke holes.
pour holes in it. I think the point is, and it was very interesting in terms of leadership there, is first to understand why am I there as a leader. And the vision was telling us this how to go about it.
Yes.
And the good thing is it also resonates with the Agenda 2063,
Yes.
AU,
AU.
and SDGs. So there was no, they were talking the same.
Yes.
But that point I'm bringing back, and I think Prof brought earlier on in the earlier discussion, and
Yes.
that's, if you look what has made the Southeast, the Vietnam,
the
the
East Southeast
Singapore,
Asian
the
giants,
Malaysia,
yes.
to be where they are, it's because there was a leadership which knew exactly what needed to be done.
I want to bring you in essentially, Prof. And the question, because we talked about resources and the fact that many of the economic giants globally have for decades some for nearly a century, had national savings, had ways of preserving resources that then enabled them to broad-based growth and maintain that growth trajectory for generations. Countries like Kenya, we are now overheating from debt. We've had instances, of course, where we said we were at the mercy of the Bretton Woods. We are now at the mercy of commercial lenders. If we were to start to say that this then does not become a perennial problem, because this is the big hole that's sitting in our budget today, where to start?
Yeah, I think, and I go back to leadership and the national psyche that's driven by the leadership of the day. Mm-hmm. And when I look at the Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam and
Asian tigers.
Yeah, and like I said last time when I was here, I spent a lot of time with the Vietnamese when they were when the economy was expanding. As part of the few people that were actually taking part in some of the planning that was taking place and advising the government. Now, in the absence of a political ideology that drives a country in a certain direction.
Yes.
You need a vision that will be able to rally everybody in that direction. And sometimes you look a lot of countries in the South, we have neither of those. Now we walked away from Vision 2030. We don't have a political ideology that gears our people towards a certain type of thinking.
Yes.
And therefore, our planning becomes a little bit haphazard in ways that we have what we call, instead of having a shotgun approach, we have an Uzi approach.
You spray it everywhere.
You spray it everywhere. With a shotgun approach, you know exactly where your aim is.
And sounds like Lambo in the American movies.
And for me, having that deliberate policies, deliberate economic, social, and political policies that guide you towards a certain direction makes a big difference. And therefore, some of the policies you're going to put together have a guided way of thinking. And you bring people of equal level of thinking into government such that they are able to drive the agenda. If you look at China, for example, the issue of long-term planning for China, because those guys they're planning 15, 25, 20 years ahead. We no longer have those what you used to have 5-year development plans anymore. And those were rallying points for everybody. And therefore, what we are missing is that rallying point where we know this is the direction we are heading, and we do whatever we need to do, and we have enough individuals who are reasonable enough to look at this road that we are taking. The potholes, we just saw the cartoon on the potholes. The potholes that are within that path, and craft policies that are going to make it possible for us to achieve. Now, in the absence of that, it becomes very tricky for us to get where we would like to go.
I want to bring you in below. As an investor, because it is a chaotic nature of the economic situation in this country, what is it taking, first, to stay afloat, to stay in business? Secondly, in terms of projecting for the growth, for the sustainability, for the continued sustenance of your business, what does it take today?
The man is cruising short.
No, you know, the responsibility of any government is to provide a conducive business environment.
Yes.
That's the role of the government. And then it's for the citizens and others, foreigners, to invest in that. And if the environment is good, you invest in business. And this is how a country then goes ahead to produce goods and services and create employment. And that's how taxes are generated and so forth. So really, when you're talking about the well-being of the people and all that, it's all about how people are doing businesses and how they are, developing goods and services, and they're creating jobs and all those things. These are the things which are very important. But I think our concern has been that every time the government comes up with a policy, that undermines that business environment, then it's a concern for any investor. And unfortunately, this happens frequently because of what you've just discussed. You know, every government that comes in wants to come up with its own policy. So you can back at Vision 2030, and the next president comes with big four. The next one says bottom up. The next one tomorrow will come up with his own things.
Do we need an economic constitution then? Something that we say this vision cannot be moved, and we sign a contract that says all the subsequent leaders have to do this thing?
I think it's not easy, because in any political in contest, in elections, people they develop their own economic policies that they want to pursue, and they're elected on that basis. So you cannot tie them down to a particular political, an economic
vision.
But a general vision that can be
exactly.
Yeah, a general vision
direction,
that we want this country to be. This is there. This is there at international level. The SDGs are an example. The Africa one is an example. I think, but those are very general in general terms. But specifically, I don't think it's easy to tie them down. Everyone wants to do his own his own thing. So I think for businesses, it's one of the toughest times. We have already seen in the last decade or so many of the multinational manufacturers and businesses that have been known when we were kids here. They have left the country, and when we were young kids, we had East African industries. Unilever manufacturing everything. Unilever now is just a trading company with a warehouse. When I was an auditor, a young man like him, I used to audit GlaxoSmithKline, Big Chams, and Cadbury, Schweppes, and all those multinational companies. They've all closed.
But I think the issue is, has this decline been because of factors? Is it that the people in power don't know the things that you're saying? Is it that they do not want to do anything about it? Or are they complicit because they're benefiting?
I don't think it's complicity because they're benefiting, but businesses normally leave or shut down when the cost of doing business becomes prohibitive. And you are no longer competitive. You cannot sell your products in the country or outside the country because you're not competitive. Then you're forced to shut down. And these factors that contribute, taxes are one of them. Actually, the single most important factor in Kenya has been the taxes. Although there are others like the cost of power, the cost of energy, the infrastructure, many things. But I think taxes more than anything else have contributed to businesses relocating to places where tax, environment is better. But I think the government knows. That's because the government hears. Every time there is a bill on finance, there's extensive engagement with businesses. In fact, it happens even with the budget itself. Before the budget is finalized, it starts 3-4 months earlier. The budget public hearing process starts. And let me tell you, businesses do submit and do engage extensively with Treasury even before the finance bill is done and before the budget is prepared. But by and large, ultimately, then political expediency, because of mismanagement of government, and which leads to debts and many other issues, then government is forced to do things which are contrary to what you have discussed with the businesses and with the people. This is what is happening.
But you're asking a very fundamental question. And perhaps
maybe, Prof, 1 second. I want Solomon to make his debut on this because he's been sitting here for a while. His maiden speech. And there are many things that, you've heard what we've said. So it's much more painful for businesses. As a smart young consultant, what are you saying to people like Bilo to stay afloat in this economy?
Okay. I do hear the sentiments being provided, and one of the canons of taxation, as is well known, is certainty. If you have a certain tax policy, then as a business, I'm able to plan. I am able to know if I'll be there in the next 5 years or not. And on paper, that is something that the national tax policy is looking at. But when you look at some of the proposals being put in the finance bill, it contradicts that. So I'll imagine putting myself in a businessman's shoe and ask myself, fine, on one hand, I want certainty in how I run my business, but every year, and I can give an example. I remember last year, the excise duty rate on money transfer services was reduced from 20% to 15%. That would have been a good incentive for you to encourage, number one, financial inclusion and movement of money securely. Now, Finance Bill 2024 flips the charts and says now, good, I reduced this for 1 year, now I want to increase it back to 20%. If I just take that as an example, then as a businessman, I'll ask myself, if we keep on yo-yoing between one rate and another per year, then am I in a position to adequately plan? And that in a way could speak to why businesses over the long term would think about, as my colleague Mheshimiwa Wakero said,
yes,
do I move my manufacturing site from Kenya to another location such that the only entity that remains in Kenya would be that of just a distributor? And that has some ramifications in the economy in the long term.
Let's then come back to you.
Yes, I think that's a very interesting one.
Yes.
Kenya Association of Manufacturers.
Yes.
Everybody's consulted. I would imagine even now they probably hear what the most media houses are really talking about. But what is this that makes them do things differently? What makes the government do things differently? What is the incentive?
Yes.
I'm listening, but I don't want to do that. I think that's what you asked. And I'm not quite sure why. Is there somebody behind them who said, no, this is the way to go? Because if you are getting the people on the ground who tells you this is not cool, this is not good, this will mean business going somewhere else, and therefore the spiral effects, unemployment, insecurity, and all that good stuff. Oh, why don't we listen? What is the incentive behind it?
I'll tell you why. This mantra, it says, I know what I want.
Yes.
Do not confuse me with facts.
All right. Confuse somebody with facts?
Yeah. I know what I want. Don't confuse me with facts. That means if I know this is the direction I want to go, it doesn't matter what facts you bring to me, I'm still going to go in that direction regardless.
What if you're digging yourself into a hole and you're digging further down and people...
Precisely, which is coming to my next point.
Yes.
I was talking to a friend of mine just yesterday. In 2019, he had 130 employees. Come COVID, business goes down. And we thought probably 2022, 2021 we will start the post-COVID
the recovery, yes.
And a lot of businesses. Now, during that time, this gentleman did work for county governments, did work for national government. And for the last 3 years, he has not been paid.
Payment, yes.
Today he has 20 employees from 130 employees.
And it's still not factored into this budget.
That's where I'm going. We have 641 billion that is all to businesses that is not even part of this budget. They claim is a verification issue and all that. They had 2 years to do the verification and all that. Now, this individual here, you're taking him from a middle class to a low class, and you have eliminated 110 jobs. And how many SMEs are in the same? So by the time the post-COVID recovery starts to set in, then we have a higher tax regime that also comes in and squeezes more. So the tax base is now narrowing. So we still have to tax those who are still in the bracket.
So is this then a war on the middle class? Because some have said that the activities we've seen in the recent past, in the latter years of the last government, and the challenges we can see being created by this finance bill, essentially are going to literally render the middle class non-existent.
I'm not even sure we have a middle class in this country. Because remember what I always say, if you're going to grow the economy, you have to grow the middle class.
Yes.
Because the rich don't spend.
Yes.
The poor have no money to spend.
And
the only people who spend are
and you do that by increasing their spending power.
So we are squeezing those who can be able to spend more to grow the economy. Those SMEs, you see, the drivers of any economy in the world is not the large businesses. It's the small and medium-sized enterprises. Right. The U.S. economy, almost 70% of the U.S. economy is MSMEs.
Yes.
If you go to countries like I go to countries like Vietnam that have been growing phenomenally the last 20 years, it's driven not by the large corporations but the small and medium-sized enterprises. So if the environment for the SMEs is not supportive enough for them to expand business, they are not creating jobs. And therefore, like Bill was saying, if we have to have growth in this country, then we have to have the environment around business to be conducive enough for people to come and take that risk and expand.
Yes. Before we go to Solomon, because I know he's waiting to give us a few of the allocations and to set out the budget structure for us. If it was up to us, Prof, to tell government what needs to be done proactively, knowing that they are in the financial hole that they are in, and knowing that there's this huge chunk of debt that needs to get paid, knowing that we have the noose of the Bretton Woods hanging around our necks, what are the, so to say, simple or things that we can do to get started to say that we have a sustainable and dependable way out of this hole? I know people have said you can live within your means. I mean, it's simple to say, but what are some of the things that we can start to talk about that will give investors confidence that we're starting to walk in the direction, that will send signals to the people that we need to start bringing in the capital that we're talking about to start walking this journey, so that next year we don't have to have this same conversation, and the year after that we say we've started to see recovery in a direction that we can talk about.
Interesting point, because that's you're really talking about sustainable development.
Yes.
How do we? What are the areas we need to, and probably need to step back and look at what are the pain points in terms of enhancing sustainable, and it goes to the simple word from my perspective, production. And the question is, what is going to make Bill to produce more than he's doing now? And if look, and we'll go to the details, and I think Professor brought it very, very clearly last week. If you look, one of the key factors, one of the key things which enhances agriculture.
Yes.
Whether you're a manufacturer, the raw material will have to come from the land somewhere. There's a joke that everything which goes in the sky must land.
Yes.
So land is so important.
And started off at the ground. Yes.
Absolutely. And how do you make that land become an asset which we can enhance production?
Yes.
And this production is not really from the demand side. Production is from the supply. Because it's a supplier of goods. I'll respond to what is producing. So you now look to things. I'm not even talking about taxation.
Yes.
I could even talk about how do enhance. And one of the things in production, and it has happened in most countries, like the Green Revolution in the Tigers. This gentleman in Marawi, and voted for their vice president who passed on in the plane crash. When he was working for IMF, he went back as a president, Mutubuka, whatever name was, I can't remember. And he changed the narrative. One thing he did, today Marawi is a net exporter of maize.
Yes,
he looked at the subsidies.
Yes.
What subsidy are we going to provide to the farmers? Not the fake fertilizers, the right seeds. But more importantly, and Museveni brought up very strongly, how do we ensure we're not depending on rain in terms of our agriculture?
Yes.
So if there's one thing I would look back, and so that will see the effect. We are all beneficiaries.
Supporting production, making our land more productive, and then removing the uncertainty of weather-based phenomena.
Absolutely. Look at the Rio GDP. If you unpack the Rio GDP, nominal GDP, it's driven by four things.
Yes.
The consumption. People must consume.
So disposable income.
Disposable income.
Yes.
They must be driven by how much we are spending. More importantly, the investments we are doing. And thirdly, the net between exports and imports. If we're importing more, forget it. So if that we can, and you look at all that, and the whole thing is about productivity.
Yes.
And when you deal down to productivity, we must go back to agriculture. Thank God we have good soils. Thank God we have 12 months in a year. We can do the farming. So that's one thing I would say. I think in the responsible government, I would step back and focus on maybe that one narrative.
Bill, do you think we've started to have that serious conversation about supporting productivity, enhancing?
No. First of all, let me tell you, every government that has come to power, from Kibaki, they have focused on, their first priority has always been, we are going to revitalize agriculture. They have not succeeded.
Yes.
Uhuru came in and he said food security.
But why do you think this is a challenge?
Because the policies that they come up with ultimately do not help in revitalizing agriculture.
Is it the policy or the implementation?
Policy has to be implemented. If it's not implemented, it's not a policy.
Yes.
So that's why today 4 little countries around us have agriculturally, food security. They are better. Yes, they have food security.
Yeah.
And here, with all our knowledge and all our skills and all the trillions we are collecting in terms of revenue, no, we are not getting. So I still think he mentioned earlier that the question is where we started from. It's about leadership and governance. Yes. The buck stops here. And unless we really address that issue, we will be talking about, because we have today in this country government that believes that they are the ones who are controlling the economy, that if we give them all the taxes, they'll turn around the economy. As far as the government is concerned, the economy is government. Government contribution to GDP is less than 23%. I mean, the economy is not government.
Yes.
The economy is people who are living and working and generating incomes and jobs and food and producing things, and that's what the economy is.
Yes.
You don't have, government does not have to collect money in trillions to be able to make people live happy. No, they can't. There's no government with all the money in the world that will make the lives of the people happy, because that's not what the government is supposed to do. So I think this is all about leadership, where people completely misunderstand their responsibilities. Then this is where we end. The last thing I want to mention is the issue, for example, a simple example is land.
Yes.
If the government can make the issue of land ownership, transfers, processing alone easy,
and transparent,
we would make land a major collateral that would benefit the people of this. Look, in Africa, less than 10% of our land is collateralized for security and use. In the rest of the world, 99% of their land, forget about land, in the Europe and others, this table is a collateral. And this one is a collateral.
Yes.
Nobody looks for cash.
Books have been
in our country, you are sitting on land, you are not able to collateralize it and get any benefit, and you are a farmer.
Yes.
You are struggling to get resources, and the banks will not, because they don't believe your documents are. So I think there are many things. That's why I say the government's mandate is really to create that conducive environment.
Yes.
If it's not able to do that, then we are not going to go anywhere.
Yes.
Let me comment on agriculture before it comes to Solomon.
Yes.
For just a minute, because I'm in that space.
Yes.
Apart from being in the I'm in Ethiopia, and we are producing food in Ethiopia. We are teaching farmers and both smart agriculture and large-scale irrigation projects in Ethiopia, and the utilization of land, like Bill is saying. Now, if you look at, I think it's page 2 of our daily business daily today, and you look at allocations to key thematic areas.
Yes.
Okay. Look at agriculture and food security, 47 billion. Look at environmental protection, 104 billion. Okay. The hype that we've had of the climate change and all these other things.
Yes.
We have allocated more than twice the amount of money.
The West wants it.
Because that's where now the people on the other side, in the north, are trying to
that's
have
a narrative
us to put
now.
money. So instead of us feeding ourselves and being food secure, we are trying to say now we have to combat climate change, we have to combat all these other things. Well and good. But if a country is hungry, a country cannot be able to develop. So we have to feed our people first. Once you feed your people, everything else is possible and is secondary. And for me, when I see that we are not spending enough money in agriculture, it bothers me, and it bothers a lot of people who actually know we should be net producers and exporters of food instead of net importers of food.
Yes.
Once we get that right, and the reason why agriculture they don't spend a lot of money. Agriculture, it's not sexy.
Yes.
Okay, and we don't have quick wins in agriculture. It's a longer term process of becoming food secure, and therefore those who want to have quick wins and quick benefits, they will not be able to put more money in agriculture. If you look at what's happening with the farmers right now, and I was just looking at the other article on Business Daily.
Yes.
More farmers now have moved to informal
sources of
funding because credit has become too expensive.
Right.
Now, if that's the case, then what are we talking about in terms of food security?
Yes.
And in terms of empowering our farmers? And once we get agriculture right,
yes,
we get all the other industries right.
Let's bring in Solomon. Essentially, he's been trying to get in on this conversation for the last few minutes. Please speak into what has been said before we get into the aspects of the budget, because essentially, a lot of the challenges you're seeing about structural issues in the economy, which then create challenges, which then mean that we have to increase the taxes because we're not either targeting properly or that sort of thing. If you think about the fact that the reason we need to raise taxes to the point where they are today is partly because everyone keeps saying it, tax to GDP ratio. We rebased in 2009, we rebased in 2016, rebased in 2019, brought in this huge chunk of the informal economy into the GDP calculation. We have had projects like the SGR, 540, 550 billion, depending on who you ask. That figure goes right into the GDP figure. But then the output from that in terms of revenue for taxation is almost nil or negligible. What do we need to do to start then easing this pressure? Because some of the taxes that we have now are supposed to be targeting directly that informal sector. But we're then seeing that we are impacting on the disposable income of people with very meager means.
Okay.
Yes, where is the balance?
I want to look at this slightly differently.
Please.
And I would agree with what my colleagues have said.
Yes.
Production is really essential as a first means to spurring economic growth.
Yes.
But for me, more importantly, I think as we run any other business, we all know that cash is ultimately key. If I do not have that cash,
yes,
I'll not be able to spend. If I'm not able to spend, the taxes that government is looking to collect
things
will not
actually
be
stop.
able.
Yes.
Yeah, things come to a standstill. And I did some quick mathematics in the morning, and this really gave me some interesting insights. Now, if you just look at tax collection, because there's the income taxes and there's a VAT, you note that for financial year 2022, pay as you earn and corporate income tax, which is paid by companies, constituted 45% of total tax revenue. And when you look at VAT, which essentially should touch everyone, because everyone who goes to a supermarket to buy in one way or another will have to pay VAT, only constituted 27%.
Yes.
So if I was to look at this from a theoretical standpoint, you would expect that VAT would constitute the larger proportion of taxes compared to income tax. But if I'm taxing pay as you earn and CIT, it remains, number one, this reduced disposable income which I would spend. And therefore, that could explain why the VAT as a proportion.
Could it also be that demand was not as strong as you would have expected?
That could be another
reason. The small
reason.
chunk of that in your calculation.
That could be another reason.
Yes.
But now, speaking to my point around cash is key. And I speak about this from a perspective of the bigger players, maybe in the agricultural space and the manufacturers. We want to be in a situation where, as we've said, we are net exporters. And when you talk about exports, when I export things out there, two things happen. Number one, I am not charged VAT, it's VAT at 0%. And number two, there's Forex inflows. I think currently our Forex cover is around 3.9 months. But looking at it from a local perspective, if I export, it means that certain costs that are incurred, the government owes me, because what will happen is that government is now entitled to refund me cash.
Yes.
Now, based on what I've seen for the last 2 years, since 2023, these manufacturers, these agricultural companies have huge amounts owed by KRA in terms of refunds.
Yes.
And this really puts a squeeze on them in their ability to, number one, working capital, and more importantly, expanding the operation so that they're able to produce more. So with that in mind, then they are forced to borrow. And if you look at how the central bank rate has been going up over the last 2 years, then borrowing has really become really, really expensive. And therefore, it reaches a point where such companies need to make certain decisions. Do I let go of some people so that I am able to sustain the business, and so on and so forth? Yes. So to cut the long story short, for me, I think what is important for government to do is to just ensure that that cash goes back to businesses as
get back into the
quickly as
economy.
possible. Yeah.
Okay, gentlemen, we are about to wind up, and I want to give each of you a round of closing remarks, brief ones. I want to start here on my left.
But I like Solomon's. You see his argument.
Yes.
The tax and all that, how it fits into production.
Yes.
I think that's fantastic. That's it. Because if you actually don't address this animal, he's a tax expert,
yes,
then you're stifling production.
Yes, production.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was going to say that when you look at the Asian tigers, the model has been that they would normally develop companies as local champions, so that you then capture the local market, you then have either oversupply of whatever you're producing, which then starts to head for the export market, right? The challenge here is that we seem to be stifling aspects of the economy, yet we say that we are pushing production. There's actually even a disconnect, because if you look at the special economic zones and the companies that are there, vis-a-vis companies like with investors like Bilo here, very different circumstances. Is it sustainable?
Now, if you look at the Asian tigers, and even the other developed, some of the developed, if you look at Korea, for example, and Japan, they were driven by what we call the chaebols and kurietsus. That's these huge conglomerates that most of the time they have a bank in the middle.
Yes.
You have Mitsubishi, for example. There's a bank.
There's a bank that owns everything,
that is able to fund production for the long term, and therefore capital is cheap. There is patience capital, and there is co-investment between the different parts of the chaebols. Creators are the same. Now, and Vietnam actually adopted that model, and look at where Vietnam is today. Vietnam is 469 billion in GDP.
Yeah.
About 25 years ago, Kenya was doing a lot. In the 1980s,
yes,
Kenya was doing a lot better than Vietnam. And
Vietnam was a post-war economy.
It's a post-war economy. Then Reagan came in 80, slapped sanctions on all communist countries. And Vietnam went down to 6 billion in 1981, 1982. Yes. From 6 billion to 469 billion. That's and huge. That is through deliberate industrialization policy that is very focused and very intentional. If we don't do that, be focused and being intentional, and give all the support that we need for this, for the manufacturers and production to take place, and also looking at all these other raw materials, where are they coming from, who is feeding who, and that's why agriculture is tied to all these other things now. So it has to be deliberate, and it has to be methodical, and it has to be pinpointed to specific, but we cannot think short term and be able to succeed.
Okay, thank you. Bilo.
You know, I think some of those countries, they copied these things from Kenya. When we started, we had the same structure.
Yes.
Agriculture, we had AFC to finance agriculture.
Yes.
Industries, we had IDB to finance industry. We had ICDC to finance commercial. We had all those things. So, but the bottom line really is what we said before. It's about leadership and governance. That's where the difference is. Otherwise, in terms of the people, the people in Kenya are very, very, very good entrepreneurs. They're very industrial. They're people working. But it's about the leadership. It's about the government. When you do not have the right policies, you don't have. Then you have a government that completely makes even difficult for you. You want to do something. You spend days and weeks to get some service from government office. You know, and sometimes you're just. There's no encouragement. Every institution of government seems to focus on regulatory or other, but don't think about facilitating business. KRA is a good example. You know, you are generating income of about, say, a billion to them in a year, or even hundreds of millions in a month. But a small mistake of 1,000 shilling, he knows, ask them, they can freeze all your activities. There's a 1,000 shilling that was business. It's so. The way that we Central Bank, the same thing. They are presiding over one of the largest commercial banks in Eastern Central Africa, in this country. But there's no time Central Bank looks at anything other than the interest of the banks, not the interest of the economy. We always talk about it, and we tell them, you guys, what stops you from saying you want a license to work in Kenya as a bank? Yes, good. 30% of all your lending should be to farmers.
Must be, yes.
If you're not able to do it, sorry, I can't give you a license. They will do it.
Deliberate and methodical.
In Korea, if you look at it in South Korea, and those people, that's how they do it. SME, I want 30% of all your money to go to SMEs. Yes, no license if you can't do that. I mean, so it's about really leadership and governance. At the end of the day, that's why we are where we are.
Prof.
Yes, I suppose I want to summarize briefly with the budget we have.
Yes.
If you look at the sectors, apart from education, which is 654,
yes,
the next it's national security.
373.
Yeah, and God knows what goes to national security. And security, if a country does have security, is because of other things behind it.
Yes.
Those are the areas we should be investing in those other areas. But I want to finish with a quote here, which is interesting with the gentleman here, who is an American business, and later he says that is Marx the plea.
Yes.
The first responsibility of a leader is to define reality.
To define your reality.
Define reality.
Yes.
The last is to say thank you. In between the two, the leader must become a servant of the people.
Okay, so servant of the people. Wow.
Who wants to be a servant?
Solomon, closing remarks for this segment. I know we'll have you in the continuing segments, but briefly, in terms of this broad-based conversation, what do you think are the things that we need to get right to start moving this conversation forward?
Okay, so for me, my view is, if I say one thing, I need to follow it up with action.
Absolutely.
Executing what.
So follow through and execution.
That's essential.
Okay.
They say don't wine and something. What do they say?
Yeah.
Yes. Don't preach water and drink wine.
Yes.
Very apt sentiment.
Number two, I think as we wait for the budget to be read, I will be very curious to know about the specific allocations to, as our colleagues have said, around agriculture and so on and so forth. But for me, more importantly, just because as a world we are heading towards the digital superhighway and the creative economy, that's potentially one area that can create so much opportunities for growth. I would want to see what government is thinking about from that perspective as well.
Okay.
Excellent.
Indeed, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. And thank you for giving us the insights that we've had. We will definitely need to look for additional time after the reading to be able to come and sort of crystallize what we've said. A lot of time, people will assume that government has all the answers. We know they don't. And speaking to experts such as yourselves enables us to help them lift the load of policy making and follow through and focus. But thank you very much for taking your time. And of course, to the viewers for engaging with us. Of course, the news continues here after the break. We will, of course, be staging from Parliament and from across the entire country to bring you insights into the budget-making process here today. The conversation being that, well, of course, this is the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. Is that really the case? Stay with us here. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. My name is Peter Wakaba. It has been a blast for this segment. We will see you on the other side.
Thanks, Peter.
Asante sana.